The dress was white, not the white of clean linen or fresh snow. No, it was the white of something that had waited too long. Something that had been folded and hidden and kept alive by sheer force of will. The kind of white that only exists in old photographs and broken promises. He saw it hanging in the window of a crumbling shop on the edge of a dying town, and something inside him stopped moving. He didn't know why. He didn't know that the dress had been sewn by hand, stitch by stitch, by a woman who had once loved him more than she loved her own heartbeat. He didn't know that she had made it while waiting for him to come back. He didn't know that she had kept waiting long after the rest of the world told her to stop. He didn't know any of that. Not yet. All he knew was that he was riding into the town of Redvale, New Mexico, on a Tuesday in October, 1884, with $30 in his boot, a wanted poster folded in his coat pocket, and a name he hadn't spoken out loud in 6 years. Her name, and somewhere on the other side of that dusty window, she was still breathing, still waiting, still wearing that dress in her dreams every night. Before we begin, tell me where you watching from today. Drop it in the comments. Sending love your way wherever you are, because this story, this one is going to cost you something. Redvale was the kind of town that looked like it had already given up. The main street ran straight through it like a wound that never quite healed, dust-packed and sun-bleached, lined on both sides with buildings that leaned into each other like tired old men. The general store had a broken shutter hanging from one hinge, swinging slow in the October wind. The church at the far end had no bell. The saloon, the largest building on the block, had a hand-painted sign above the door that read the long mile. The letters faded almost to nothing. Caleb Doss rode in just before noon. He was 34 years old, though he looked closer to 40. 6 years of hard living had a way of adding years to a man. His coat was brown and worn at the elbows. His hat was pulled low against the pale, flat sun. His horse, a gray mare named Sable, walked with a steady, unhurried rhythm, her hooves raising small clouds of red dust with every step. Caleb didn't look left or right as he came down the main street. He had a rule about that. Looking around too much in a new town telegraphed nervousness, and nervous men got noticed. So he kept his eyes forward, his spine straight, his hands visible on the reins. He was the kind of man who had learned how to be invisible by refusing to act like someone who was hiding. He tied Sable outside the long mile and went in. The saloon was dim inside, smelling of sawdust and old whiskey and something else underneath. Something like stale grief. For men sat at different tables, none of them talking to each other. A barkeep with heavy arms and a gray beard polished a glass behind the bar with the mechanical focus of someone who had polished the same glass 10,000 times and expected to polish it 10,000 more. Caleb sat at the bar and ordered water. The barkeep looked at him the way barkeeps always looked at men who ordered water. Not with judgment, just with recognition. Men who ordered water in saloons were either very broke or very careful. This one, the barkeep decided, was probably both. "Passing through?" the barkeep asked, setting the glass down. "Depends," Caleb said. "On what?" Caleb drank slowly before answering. "On whether someone's still here." The barkeep went back to polishing. Smart enough not to ask who. Caleb sat with his water and let his eyes adjust to the low light. He scanned the room without appearing to scan it. 2 cowboys playing cards in the corner. An older man sleeping against the wall with his hat over his face. A younger man, maybe 20, sitting alone near the window, nursing a beer and staring out at the street with the hollow look of someone waiting for a life that wasn't coming. Nothing unusual. Nothing that felt like danger. That was always the moment Caleb trusted least. When things felt quiet. He finished his water, paid with a coin from his coat pocket. Not the boot, never from the boot in public, and stepped back outside. That's when he saw it. The dress. It was across the street, in the window of a small shop wedged between the hardware store and what looked like a closed-down barber. The shop had no name on the front, just a faded curtain pulled halfway across the glass. And there, in the uncovered half of the window, hanging on a wooden form like something sacred, was a white dress. Caleb stopped walking. He stood on the boardwalk and looked at it. He couldn't explain the feeling that moved through him then. It wasn't something he had words for. It was more like a sound, low and distant and coming from somewhere inside his chest that he had boarded up years ago. He stood there long enough that a woman passing by looked at him with mild concern, the way people look at someone who has gone very still in a strange place. He crossed the street. He went up to the window and looked at the dress more closely. It was finely made even from the outside. The stitching along the bodice was delicate and precise. The sleeves were slightly puffed at the shoulder, the skirt full and long. Someone had put enormous care into every inch of it. And then the door to the shop opened. Not because he had knocked, because someone inside had seen him standing there. He looked up, and the world, as he understood it, came apart at the seams. Her name was Clara Voss, or it had been. He didn't know what name she went by now. He didn't know anything about the last 6 years of her life, and that ignorance hit him like a fist the moment he saw her face. She stood in the doorway of the shop with one hand on the frame and the other hanging loose at her side. She was wearing a plain blue dress, work-worn, with her dark hair pinned back simply. She was 31 now. She had been 25 the last time he had seen her. The years had changed her face. Not harshly, but deeply, the way time changes a river without destroying it. She was still the most striking woman he had ever seen, and she was looking at him like he was a ghost, which, to her, he supposed he was. Neither of them spoke for what felt like a very long time. A gust of wind came down the street and lifted a small spiral of dust between them. Somewhere behind him, a horse made a low, indifferent sound. "Caleb," she finally said. "Just his name, nothing else. The way you say a name when you're testing whether it still belongs to the real world." "Clara," he said. Her jaw tightened slightly. Something passed across her eyes that he couldn't fully read. Not anger, not relief, not grief, but something that contained all three the way a storm cloud contains everything before it breaks. "You should come inside," she said. "Before someone sees you." He followed her in. The shop was small and warm, cluttered with bolts of fabric stacked against the walls, spools of thread arranged in shallow wooden trays, a large work table in the center covered with patterns and scissors and measuring ribbons. It smelled of beeswax and cotton and faintly, very faintly, of lavender. She didn't offer him a seat. She went to the work table and began folding a length of fabric with careful, deliberate motions, keeping her hands busy. He recognized that about her. Clara had always dealt with difficult emotions by doing something with her hands. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "For years," she said. "Alone?" A pause. "Long enough to mean something." "Yes," she said. He looked around the shop. His eyes landed on the window, on the dress hanging there. Up close, it was even more impressive. The workmanship was extraordinary. He looked at it for a moment, then looked back at her. "That dress is beautiful," he said. She stopped folding. Her hands went still on the fabric. She didn't turn around right away. She stood with her back to him, her shoulders very straight, and when she finally turned, her expression was something he had no name for. It was the expression of a person standing at the edge of something enormous, deciding whether to step forward or step back. She said very quietly, "It was made for my wedding." He waited. Her eyes met his, steady and clear and devastating. "To you." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The silence after it spread in all directions. Caleb Doss had survived gunfights. He had survived a cattle stampede in Kansas that had killed 3 men around him. He had survived 6 years of running from something he couldn't name and something he could name all too clearly. He had survived a lot of things. But standing in that small warm room with Clara Voss looking at him like that, with that dress hanging in the window behind him, this was the hardest thing he had ever survived in his life, and it had been less than 3 minutes. "Clara." "Don't," she said, quiet but absolute. "Not yet. You don't get to explain yet." He closed his mouth. She turned back to her fabric. "There's a room above the hardware store," she said. "Mr. Henley rents it out. It's not much, but it's private. Stay there tonight." She paused. "We'll talk tomorrow." "And if I don't?" he asked. She looked at him over her shoulder. Then you ride out the same way you rode in, and I keep the dress, and we both die wondering. He had no answer for that. He walked out into the afternoon sun with his heart doing something it hadn't done in 6 years. It was remembering. He rented the room above the hardware store. It was exactly as Clara described. Not much. A cot, a wash basin, a single window with a cracked pane overlooking the alley between the buildings. The floor creaked with every step. The wall above the cot had a faded rectangle where a painting or a mirror had once hung, a ghost of whatever comfort the room had once tried to offer. Caleb set his saddlebags down, washed his face, and sat on the edge of the cot. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, the way you unfold something you've looked at so many times you almost don't need to open it anymore. It was a wanted poster. The printing was smeared in one corner from water damage, but the face in the center drawing was clear enough. And so was the name. Wade Colton, wanted for murder and robbery. Reward, $500. Dead or alive. Below the name, in smaller print, last known whereabouts, Eastern New Mexico Territory. Caleb had been following this poster for 3 months. He had followed it through 4 towns across 2 counties, through a stretch of desert that had nearly killed him and Sable both. He had followed it because Wade Colton was the reason he had left in the first place. Wade Colton was the thing he had run toward and then run from and then finally decided 3 months ago to run toward again. This time to finish it. He hadn't known that the trail would bring him to Redvale. He hadn't known that Redvale was where Clara was. He wasn't sure he believed in coincidence. But he also wasn't sure he believed in anything else. He folded the poster and put it back in his coat. He lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. He didn't sleep. Around 9 in the evening, there was a knock at his door. He was on his feet with his hand on his gun before the second knock came. He moved to the side of the door. Never stand directly behind a door you haven't opened yet. That was another rule, and said, "Who is it?" "Easy, friend." A man's voice. Calm, unhurried, with a faint drawl that placed him somewhere in the South. "Just a man who knows your name." Caleb's grip on the gun tightened. "A lot of men know my name," he said. "Not the one you're using," the voice said. "The real one." Caleb opened the door. The man standing in the hall was about 50, with a face that had lived many different kinds of weather. He was dressed neatly, too neatly for Redvale, in a gray suit and a clean hat. His boots were expensive. His hands were in plain sight, which Caleb noted and appreciated. He had the easy confidence of a man who had never needed to prove anything physically because he had always found other, more effective ways to destroy people. "May I?" the man said, gesturing toward the room. Caleb stepped aside. The man came in, looked around the sparse room without comment, and chose to stand near the window rather than sit. He kept his hands visible. That was the only courtesy he was offering, and both of them knew it. "My name is Harlan Fitch," the man said. "I represent certain business interests in this territory. Mr. Doss, the real Mr. Doss. I think we need to speak plainly." "Then speak," Caleb said. "Wade Colton," Harlan said. Caleb said nothing. "You're looking for him," Harlan continued. "I know this because I've been watching you for 6 weeks. You're very good. But I'm better at watching than most people are at not being watched." He smiled, not unkindly. "Wade is here, in Redvale, has been for 2 months, living quietly, which is amusing given his history." "Why are you telling me this?" Caleb asked. "Because I want him found," Harlan said. "I have reasons that are my own and that I won't share, but our goals align. The difference is, I can tell you exactly where he is." He paused. "And I can also tell you something else. Something about the woman in the dress shop." Caleb went very still. "Be very careful," he said softly. "About what you say next." Harlan Fitch looked at him for a long moment. "She knows he's here too," Harlan said. "And she hasn't told you." He set a small folded note on the windowsill and walked out. Caleb stood in the room alone, listening to the man's footsteps descend the stairs, listening to the silence that followed. Then he picked up the note. He held it a long time before he opened it. He went to her the next morning before sunrise. The town was still and gray, the light not yet committed to day, the air holding the kind of cold that October kept specifically for the hours just before dawn. His boots were quiet on the boardwalk. A dog somewhere barked twice and went silent. The rest of Redvale slept without dreaming. Clara answered the door before he could knock. She had been awake. He could see it in her eyes, the particular texture of a sleepless night, the way it leaves something raw around the edges of a person. She was holding a cup of something hot, and she stepped back without a word and let him in. The shop looked different in the early morning. The fabric on the tables caught the faint light from the windows and turned it into something almost soft. The dress in the window was a pale shape against the gray glass, waiting. Clara sat in the chair beside her work table. Caleb sat on the low stool across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about Wade Colton." She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the floor. "How do you know that name?" she asked. "Same way you do," he said. "Because he touched our lives." She looked up at him then, and he saw the thing she had been carrying. It was enormous. It had been enormous for a long time, and she had been carrying it alone in this small shop in this dying town, carrying it the way she had once carried hope, with her whole body. "He came here 2 months ago," she said. "I knew who he was the moment I saw him. I recognized him from—" She stopped, swallowed. "From before. From before I left," Caleb said. "Yes." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Clara, what happened before I left? Tell me what you know." She set the cup down. "I know that Wade Colton worked for a man named Gideon Marsh," she said. "I know that Marsh hired men to do things that couldn't be traced back to him. Robberies. Worse." She paused. "I know that 6 years ago, Wade Colton killed Thomas Reyes." Thomas Reyes. Caleb's jaw tightened. Thomas Reyes had been his partner, his closest friend, the man who had ridden with him for 4 years across half the territory, the man who had been shot dead in a dirt alley in a town called Cutter's Creek on a Friday night in October 1878, and whose body Caleb had found the next morning. "How do you know about Thomas?" Caleb asked. "Because Thomas was my brother," Clara said. The silence was absolute. Caleb looked at her. He had known Thomas Reyes for 4 years. He had never known Thomas had a sister. Thomas didn't talk about family. Said it made a man soft to talk about the people he'd left behind. Caleb had respected that. He had his own people he didn't talk about. He had never connected the name. Clara Voss, Clara Reyes, before she'd taken her mother's name. A detail he had never had. A detail that now reordered everything. "You knew who I was when I rode in yesterday," he said slowly. "I knew you were coming," she said. "I'd heard your name connected to Thomas. I'd been waiting, not for you specifically. I didn't know if you'd ever come. I just knew that eventually, someone would follow Colton here." She looked at the window, at the dress. "I started making it 3 years ago. The dress. Clara, let me finish." Her voice was steady, quiet, like the surface of deep water. "I made it because I needed something to believe in. Thomas always said you were a good man, the best man he knew, and I had no one left after he died. I had nothing." She finally looked at Caleb directly. "So I made a dress for the man my brother trusted most in the world, who I had never met. I made it because it gave me something to wake up for. I know how it sounds. It sounds like someone surviving," Caleb said. She looked at him for a long time. "Colton lives on Lander Street," she said finally. "Third house. He calls himself Elias Ward here. He thinks he's safe." Caleb nodded slowly. He stood up. "Don't go today," she said suddenly. He stopped. "Give me 1 day," she said, "before whatever happens next. Give me 1 day where you're just a man who came back, and I'm just a woman who waited. 1 day." He looked at her. He looked at the dress. He sat back down. They spent the day talking. It was a strange, fragile thing. This day they carved out between them in the middle of everything pressing in from the edges. They talked for hours the way people talk when they know time is short and they refuse to waste it on silence. Clara made coffee on the small iron stove in the back room. Caleb fixed the broken hinge on her back door because he noticed it, and fixing things with his hands was one of the few ways he knew to be gentle. She told him about Thomas. The real Thomas. Not the capable, closed-off trail partner Caleb had known, but the boy who had grown up barefoot in a small house in Santa Fe, who had been afraid of thunderstorms until he was 12 and then pretended he never had been, who had sent her letters in a handwriting so bad she had to hold them up to the light to read them. The Thomas who had been her only family after their parents died of typhoid in 1875, and who had been taken from her 3 years later by a man with no conscience and a pistol. Caleb told her about those years after. He didn't spare himself. He told her about the drinking, the drifting, the long pointless stretches of nothing where he just moved because moving was easier than staying still with the shape of his guilt. He told her about finding the poster 3 months ago, and how it had felt like a door opening, not into something good but into something necessary. He told her that he had never stopped thinking about Thomas, about what he could have done differently. She listened without looking away. Around mid-afternoon they walked through the town together, which felt like a reckless thing to do and was exactly the kind of reckless thing one single day in the middle of everything allows for. Redvale looked different with company. The general store had a barrel of apples out front, and Clara bought 2 without being asked to justify the expense. They ate them walking, and it was such an ordinary human thing that Caleb felt something in his chest that he didn't know what to do with. They avoided Lander Street. They both knew where it was, and they both avoided it without discussing it, the way 2 people avoid a wound that isn't ready to be touched yet. At dusk, they sat on the front step of the shop, watching the light drain out of the sky. "What happens after?" Clara asked. "After what?" "After tomorrow." She turned her head to look at him. "After Colton." Caleb thought about this honestly, which was harder than it should have been. "I don't have a good answer for that," he said. "I know you don't," she said. "I'm asking anyway." He looked at the sky, orange and deep red at the horizon, fading to purple overhead. The first star appearing in the east, small and steady. "I've been going somewhere for so long," he said slowly, "that I forgot to think about stopping, about what stopping looks like." He was quiet for a moment. "You built something here, real. This shop, these people who bring you their good fabric and their important occasions. You built a life." "I built a waiting room," she said. The words hit him differently than she probably intended. "Clara, I don't say that for sympathy," she said quickly. "I say it because it's true, and because I'm not angry about it anymore. I spent a lot of years being angry. It's heavy." She looked at her hands. "But I'm done waiting regardless of what happens. If you leave again tomorrow, I'm done waiting." He turned toward her. She was looking at him with that steady, devastating clarity she had. The light was almost gone now. The Long Mile saloon at the end of the street was glowing from within, piano music drifting out into the night air, muffled and warm. "I'm not planning to leave," he said. "Planning and doing are different things," she said. "Yes," he admitted. "They are." She stood up, brushed the dust from her dress. "Come in," she said. "I'll make supper." He followed her inside. They ate at the work table, pushing the fabric aside, the lamp between them making everything gold and close and small. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Colton or Thomas or the past 6 years, about the best meal they'd ever eaten, about what they would do with money they'd never have, about whether Redvale would survive another 10 years or quietly become another pile of boards in the desert. When he finally left to go back to his room above the hardware store, the moon was up and the town was silent. He stopped in the middle of the dark street and looked up at the sky. Somewhere on Lander Street, a man named Wade Colton was sleeping, living under a different name in a different life, breathing air he hadn't earned. Tomorrow, he walked on. He didn't see the shadow that moved at the far end of the street. He didn't see it pull back into the darkness. He didn't see the figure stand and watch him go, with something cold and patient in its stillness. But someone had seen him, and someone was now making plans of their own. He woke before sunrise to a sound he recognized before he was fully conscious. It was the sound of boots on wood, moving fast. Too fast for this hour, for this town, for the particular texture of an ordinary morning. He was up and dressed in the dark with his gun in his hand by the time the knocking hit his door. "Doss!" A voice he didn't recognize. Low and urgent. "Colton knows you're here. He's running. Now." He opened the door. A boy of about 16 stood there, breathing hard, eyes wide with the specific terror of someone who had been talked into delivering a message they didn't fully understand but sensed was dangerous. He had a crumpled note in his hand. "Caleb took it. He saw you last night. He's heading north on the canyon road before first light. If you want him, go now. H.F. Harlan Fitch." Caleb was down the stairs and out into the street in under a minute. The town was still in that absolute way it gets just before dawn breaks, every shape gray and weightless. He crossed to the stable at a run, saddled Sable with quick, practiced efficiency, and was moving up the main street before the first true light touched the eastern sky. He rode north. The canyon road was a narrow cut between two rises of red rock that stretched for about 3 miles before opening into a broad flat plain. The Colton was on that road. There was only one way through. Caleb pushed Sable harder than he liked to, the mare's breath coming in white puffs in the cold morning air, the red rock rising on either side like the walls of something ancient and indifferent. He heard them before he saw them. 2 horses, moving fast, and then slowing. He came around a curve in the road and pulled Sable up hard. There were 2 men. One was Wade Colton. He recognized him from the poster, heavy-set, thick-bearded, riding a dark horse and pulling a second loaded animal behind him. The other man was Harlan Fitch, sitting perfectly composed on a pale horse in the middle of the road, blocking Colton's path as casually as if he were waiting for a stage. Colton had his gun out. Fitch did not. "Easy, Wade," Fitch was saying as Caleb came to a stop 20 yards behind Colton. "No need for this to go messy." Colton spun his horse when he heard Caleb's approach. Now he was caught between 2 men, his gun swinging between them, his face pulled tight with the specific desperation of a man who has planned for many outcomes but not for this one. "Doss," Colton said. He knew the name. Of course he did. "Wade," Caleb said. "You don't want this," Colton said. "You got no idea what you're walking into here." "Tell me about Thomas Reyes," Caleb said. Something happened in Colton's face then. Not guilt exactly, not shame. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who has done so many things that the specific thing you're asking about has been buried under all the others, and the act of excavating it is its own kind of effort. "Cutter's Creek," Caleb said. "October 78. That alley. That was a job," Colton said. "I don't expect you to understand that, but Reyes was in the wrong place. Marsh needed—" "Don't," Caleb said. His voice was very quiet, the quietest it had been since he arrived in Redvale. "Don't make him a circumstance." Colton's gun swung toward Caleb. Caleb was already moving, not drawing, moving. Sideways off Sable in one motion, the shot hitting nothing but red rock. He came up behind the cover of the rise with his own gun out, breathing steady. The whole world narrowed down to the 100 feet of canyon road in front of him. What followed was not like the gunfights in the stories men told in saloons. It was not dramatic. It was not beautiful. It was fast and ugly and loud in the enclosed space of the canyon. The sound bouncing off the rocks and coming back changed. And when it was over, 3 shots had been fired in total. 1 by Colton. 2 by Caleb. Colton's horse stood riderless on the road. Harlan Fitch sat exactly where he had been, his expression unchanged. Caleb walked forward slowly. He confirmed what had to be confirmed. He stood over it for a moment with his gun at his side and his breathing the only sound he was aware of. 6 years. 6 years of wait. He exhaled. "That's done," Fitch said from his horse. Caleb looked up at him. "And you? What do you get from this?" Fitch smiled slightly. "Colton owed a debt to my employers that he was never going to pay. This resolves the matter cleanly." He tipped his hat. "For what it's worth, Mr. Doss, Thomas Reyes was a good man. I knew him briefly years before Cutter's Creek. He deserved better than what he got." Fitch turned his horse and rode back toward the plain without another word. Caleb stood in the canyon alone. The sun was coming up fully now, flooding the red rock with gold, turning the dust in the air into something that glittered briefly before settling. Somewhere back down the road, Redvale was waking up. Somebody was making coffee. The dress was still hanging in the window. He mounted Sable and rode back. And this time he rode slow. He came back down the main street as the town was opening its eyes. A woman was sweeping her front step. 2 men were loading a wagon outside the hardware store. A child was chasing a dog in a circle in the dust. Both of them absolutely committed to the game. Ordinary things. The kind of ordinary things that keep the world from understanding how close it always is to something violent. He stopped Sable outside the dress shop. Clara was in the doorway. She had heard the shots, even from this distance, the canyon carrying sound in strange ways. She had been standing in that doorway for 20 minutes, he understood, watching the road. He dismounted. He walked up the 3 steps to where she stood. She looked at him for a long time, reading him the way people read things they have studied deeply, quickly, thoroughly, understanding the spaces between the words as much as the words themselves. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She closed her eyes for just a moment, long enough for something to pass through her and leave. Then she opened them. "Thomas can rest," she said quietly. "Yes," Caleb said. "He can." They stood there on the step in the early morning sun. The wind was gentle. The dress behind them in the window caught the light and held it. Caleb Doss had ridden into Redvale, New Mexico, on a Tuesday in October with $30 in his boot and a name he hadn't spoken in 6 years and a weight he had been carrying since the moment he found his best friend dead in a dirt alley and hadn't known how to set it down. He didn't know what came next. He was honest enough with himself to admit that. He didn't know if a man like him could stay in one place. Didn't know if the stillness of a town like this would be peace or punishment. Didn't know if he deserved the thing that was standing in front of him in a blue work dress with her eyes full of 6 years of patience. But he was done running. He had learned, finally, the thing that most men learn too late or never at all. That the thing you run toward and the thing you run from are sometimes the same road. And the only way to find out where it ends is to stop running it. He looked at the dress in the window. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said. Clara looked at it too. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when something mattered enough to deserve silence before it was spoken. "I know," she said simply, and she took 1 step back into the shop. And she held the door open, and she waited one final time for him to decide. He took off his hat. He stepped inside. The door closed behind them, and the dress hung in the window of the small shop on the edge of Redvale, in the pale October light, waiting for nothing anymore. Some things in this world are made once, for one person, and they either find their way to them, or they don't. Caleb Doss rode 6 years of wrong road to find his way back to a woman who had spent those same 6 years turning grief into something beautiful. And maybe that's the hardest kind of love. Not the kind that comes easy, but the kind that waits in a window. The kind that keeps its shape even when the person it was made for doesn't deserve it yet. What would you have done in his place? Would you have stayed? Or would the road have been too loud to ignore? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one.